Time to enter the Heatwave, even though I'm pretty sure this is not going to be an enjoyable event. And as of which I would imagine it's probably going to take me at least 3/4 of an hour for me to do this, because we are doing Sidewinder Gulch on a motorcycle. This, I immediately know for sure, is not going to keep me motoring. Already used the Indiana twice, so not going to do that again. I might reuse the Champ, just because of how I've not used this thing recently. Well, already used this one. Yeah, this'll work. Let's use the Champ, even though we are basically using a BMX for this event. Sidewinder is another track with lots of cunning shortcuts that the bikes love. Memorize them on this track if you've got that kind of mental power. Well, I wouldn't necessarily consider my mentality to be omnipotent, but I would definitely consider it to have power to a certain degree. But it's not unspeakable power, considering that's more or less what omnipotence is. And this is going to be even more interesting because we have some big rigs in this race. Meaning, of course, that this race is only going to be even worse than it needs to be. Don't know what exactly they're trying to achieve here, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to work because we have some big rigs in this, along with many other things that I wish were not in this race. And now it's going to feel like a bombing raid, because I know that's more or less what this AI are just going to end up doing to each other. They're just going to make it look like we're in a war zone. Basically, even more of a war zone than the front stretch grandstand at the 1955 24 Hours of Le Mans. Ironically, the day, of course, when motorsport had nearly ended for good, but ironically, for one reason or another, they were actually brave enough to bring it back to us the following year. And I think it's definitely clear to say lessons have easily been learned since then. And they've definitely been learned, of course, since the end of the Second World War, considering that is more or less what that crash in particular was reminiscent of. Or at least it's what I think it was reminiscent of. I couldn't necessarily tell you the full story, but one of my channels should probably have the full story about the 24 Hours of Le Mans, effectively the race that nearly killed motorsport altogether. Easily considered by many as being the worst disaster in motor racing history, undeniably, I might add. And it is fair to say lessons since then, of course, have definitely been learned. And furthermore, the 24 Hours of Le Mans is a lot safer now than it was back then. Because back then, of course, drivers basically used to be covered with oil, and they weren't even wearing fireproof suits at that time. They were basically just wearing casual clothing. You literally had to be fearless to enter motorsport at that time, and the same can also be said for the 60s and the 70s. You literally had to be fearless, even though ironically it was the 70s and when motorsport was really trying to improve, but yet at the same time it had still not improved enough for there to be any real progress. I mean, in the old days of motorsport, most drivers were basically dying in high-speed crashes up to probably like the late 80s. When motorsport was really starting to enter its era of safety, and even then of course there were still drivers dying every so often, because this was up to a point of course in where lessons were still yet to be learned. And well, I think it is fair to say that F1 has definitely learned its lessons from the 1994 World Championship, undeniably. Whilst I am just, you know, basically here talking about some of the worst tragedies to ever emerge in motorsport. But yeah, I mean, basically what this more or less is a war zone. It's more or less like we're basically in the Mad Max universe. Just pretty much on a road to survival, is what I suppose you could call it. But oddly enough, I've actually not had any real trouble up to this point. This race has actually gone pretty smoothly, in my opinion. It's certainly gone much smoother than I thought it was going to go. I mean, I thought for sure this race was going to be a genuine shit show, but surprisingly for me it's actually not been the case. It's been a lot smoother than I thought it was going to be, to put it simply. And I mean a lot smoother. Maybe I'll have a shot of winning a race here at Sidewinder Gulch on my first attempt after all. And I only say maybe because, well, I'm still apprehensive about what could happen, either in front or behind me, but everything at the moment is looking good. That's all I can say for now. I don't think I'm going to win or lose this event until I've made it to that final corner, and then once I have, then I'll know for sure if this race will actually turn out to be a smooth ride. It's been a smooth ride up to this point, but I really cannot afford to bottle this, regardless of how much of a margin I may have on everyone else. Yeah, this is going to be a win. Okay, that race was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. At least, to me, it was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Probably because I was successful in staying out of trouble. That's probably what, technically, had made this race win. Because I stayed out of trouble, for the most parts. And, to be completely honest, bikes actually aren't too bad around Sidewinder Gulch, as long as you stay out of the mud. Then pretty much everything is okay. Is, you know, what I'm saying. But yeah, that was a much smoother ride around this circuit than I thought it was going to be. I can easily tell you that much. Yeah, not really getting any useful shots here of the champ. I think I just noticed some glitch effects there for some reason. Alright, that should do it. So, in the end of that, I won by 4.5 seconds over Toby Mafana, and in third position was Will Storer in the Patriot Renegade. Then, in fourth position was Chodder ahead of Kilburn, Buzzbomb was in sixth ahead of Kirkland, Wilson was eighth ahead of Wild Mark, And Hazel Reynard completes the top 10, and then for the bottom 3 we had Carlos Diego ahead of Marco McCormack, and Chris McKinney was the last finisher in this race of the final classification order, and an overall total of 19 seconds from first to 13th regarding the overall margin of victory. And we have unlocked ourselves another ticket. And along with it, we've also unlocked another buggy. And I'm certain that's a buggy. Alrighty then. So, one event remains, and that is called Skull and Crossbone, taking place at Dust Devil. Coming up next.